With the stock market crashing, businesses shutting down, and the Fed just printing free money, we are truly living in a historical moment that will be remembered for many decades to come. In this video, I aim to address the questions: is the lockdown working? What is the approach to go forward? And what would be the ramifications of a prolonged lockdown? With much of Europe and America having been under lockdown for about a month now, many of us have got too familiar with the terms such as distance learning, work from home, and flattening the curve. But another thing that has been on many people's minds is the question: is the lockdown working? And to answer this question bluntly, yes. Yes, the lockdown is working if you look at it from a certain perspective. This perspective, of course, being the total number of deaths and the rate at which this is slowing down. From here, we can clearly see that the total number of deaths from the virus has reached to what we believe is the peak. And once something reaches its peak, it could only go right, either flattening the curve or straight down.
Represents a pandemic that has been met early with interventions like quarantining and social distancing. More people stay at home, and so fewer people become infected at a given time.
This is some great news when you hear it for the first time. However, once you ponder over it just a little bit, you realize that it took us several weeks to reach this point. And realistically, it will take us at least a similar amount of time for things to calm down. And of course, when I mean calm down, I mean to reach our massively subjective satisfactory level. Well, that is until we lift some of the restrictions of lockdown. It may just be the crazy that's produced from quarantine speaking here, but to me, it makes no sense to first impose a lockdown, then see the cases and death rates slow down, consequently resulting in the lockdown restrictions going up, and then all of a sudden watch the cases and death rates go flying back up. I mean, what is the next step? Initiate yet another lockdown, expecting different results until a vaccine that's created? Well, don't hold your breath. This approach will inevitably result in a proliferation of infection rates, thus indirectly implementing something called herd immunity. The chances are that you must have heard the term herd immunity from the politicians in your respective countries.
Reingold is betting that herd immunity is how this will end.
If we're starting with a population where no one is immune to this virus, which is what we assume, we can get to high levels of immunity, which will basically drive down transmission and prevent infection through herd immunity.
But despite its surge in popularity, do we really know what it means? Herd immunity is when so many people in a community become immune to a disease that it stops the disease from spreading. This essentially breaks the chain as there is minimal or no transmission of the infection. Typically, this is done in two ways. The first, many people are vaccinated against the disease to achieve immunity. As there won't be a suitable vaccine that has been sufficiently tested and verified to work against the masses anytime soon, this is out of the question. 2. Many people contract the disease and in time build up an immune response to it. This approach, also known as natural immunity, will occur as a byproduct of the policies implemented by our governments right now across the world. Well, this is according to one of the world's senior epidemiologists, Professor John Kieski.
What you're advocating then is we protect those groups better, and as far as the rest of the population is concerned, we just allow it to pass through the population, essentially.
Essentially, yes.
Which is, I mean, I know that it's now
herd immunity, yes.
That's what's commonly understood by what we call the herd immunity strategy, basically.
Yeah. There are others, it's not just the old and frail. I mean, there are people that should be protected, but I don't think you can stop it.
Now, before you start running outside and start screaming F the lockdown and start licking all the trolleys, it's important to understand that just because one very qualified individual states his opinion, there will always be another person with an equally qualified opinion that contradicts it directly. And unfortunately, this situation is no different. For every one specialist's opinion, there's another so-called ready to counteract the point. This is why it's always better to be evidence and logic based than emotional and feeling based. As mentioned earlier, this illness has pretty much put most of the world on pause, to the point where even the most powerful nations and people are panicking and are being forced to make some serious decisions, one of which being shutting the economy. Now, before you get all Mother Teresa on me and saying stuff like human life is precious and why is this guy talking about businesses when there's lives on the line? While I do agree with the fact that life is precious and no amount of life can take that away, it's important to at least try to understand the bigger picture and how we will be affected by the decisions we make right now. In this case, a piece of the picture would be a collapsed economy. Over the decades, we have faced some huge economic crises, whether it's the Great Depression in the 1930s.
You can see it in their eyes. They'd been promised a bonus for their service in World War I, but it was not due to be paid until 1945. The desperate veterans wanted their money now. They were called the Bonus Army. On July 28th, the Bonus Army came to blows with Washington police. Shots were fired. President Herbert Hoover barricaded himself in the White House and called out the troops.
Soldiers have orders to burn down the unsanitary and illegal camp. And the roaring flames sound the death knell to the fantastic Bonus Army.
2001 attacks, and the 2007 crisis.
Down 1.7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%. We're down over 16% Dow at the same time.
But this time, it's different. Many of the crises that have already happened only affected a handful of countries, most of which were developed. However, this illness has literally caused a global crisis. Regardless of your location, you are directly affected by this outbreak. Moreover, because this is a health crisis, the only real way to get the economy back on track is to contain and control the virus. Essentially, what's happening right now is that more people continue to get the virus and the cases continue to go up. Hospitals and care facilities struggle more and more. Countries are now trying to flatten this curve by enforcing a lockdown. As a consequence of these policies, the economy gets hurt bad, real bad, to the point where many economists are saying that we could enter not a recession but a depression. But how bad could things get? To answer this question, we have to go over two potential outcomes. The first being more of an optimistic viewpoint, whereby the summer of 2020 could be a date where the lockdown restrictions could be massively lifted, and thus the economy could get reignited. This, of course, is subject to whether we manage to further contain the virus using a lockdown tactic, continue the nationwide testing, and perhaps even develop an adequate antibody test. But if for some reason we are not able to contain the virus and the lockdown persists, it could be possible that major improvements could be seen at the later half of 2021. Now, if this was to happen, there will be some serious issues for us. The number of public debt would be ridiculously huge. GDP could be down around 20 percentage points. There would be huge social unrest among the people, which is already happening in the States. Many businesses would cease to exist and unemployment numbers would be through the roof. I mean, just to put all of this in perspective for you, let me just go over the last point of mass unemployment. Right now, around 78% of the workers in the US are living paycheck to paycheck. 78 bloody percent. What the heck are you going to do with a $1,000 check from the government when you were struggling to make ends meet when you had a job, never mind now that you'll be jobless for the last year and a half? If we ever do reach this point, we are just going to become another statistic to the already 40 million starving in the United States. That's right, 40 million in 2020. You know what really wobbles your mind even more than this is when you realize the fact that all of this suffering is happening in a so-called land of the free, a first world country. Can you imagine the detrimental effects of a shut economy would have on a third world nation?
A shopkeeper who is closing his or her small shop where he or she gained her livelihood for 90 days, how is he or she going to survive? You are not telling me how that person is going to live. And yet you want to convince me to say yes 90 days. And even 45 days, I don't agree with. 45 days, 1 month, 15 days, 1.5 months. Can you imagine a family person who struggles to make ends meet by selling this or that, and you ask that person to stop that? And you expect that person to be able to prevent himself or herself from this virus. What means does he or she have to do that?
The figures would be astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. At this point, we've just discussed hunger-related deaths. There has been no consideration towards death from other diseases or any inflictions by oneself because of factors like depression and mental illnesses. I mean, suicide alone takes 800,000 deaths a year. That is one person every 40 seconds. This figure, of course, is only going to get inflated because of the social isolation and the lack of face-to-face contact with friends and family. Factoring all of this information in, I believe far more people would suffer and die from the consequences of a wrongly strategized and implemented lockdown. If you agree, great, let me know down in the comment section. And if you disagree, that's great too. Let me know in the comment section why. If you've made it this far into the video, I have two things to say. Firstly, thanks for giving me your time for the last few minutes. I really appreciate it. And secondly, here's an alternative approach to a heavily imposed lockdown that's currently being implemented right now across the world. This solution looks at the bigger, more further down the road picture and the immediate one. The key pillar that form the foundation of the approach is to mitigate the spread of the virus, preserve and protect the economy, and more importantly, protect the vulnerable. I will link the sources that I used to collate this information together. Much thanks to them. I would not be able to do this without them. Despite the media's attempt to get us to believe that anyone can die from the virus, the data shows otherwise. The disease disproportionately attacks those with pre-existing conditions and specifically the elderly. Therefore, it becomes imperative for this target group to be looked after well. This means that a strict shelter-in-place policy is implemented to keep these folks at bay so that their physical contact with the outside world is limited. This protocol should be reviewed on a bi-weekly basis as it will be very hard on the target group, but it's better than implementing a blanket shelter-in-place protocol for everyone everywhere. For those who are caring and catering for this target group, will need to have some solid guidelines and rules to follow. These people are essentially the medium between the vulnerable and the healthy. These rules should involve testing of each individual to see if they have the virus or not, in addition to regular subsequent temperature checks. All goods and services that will be passed to the vulnerable should be fully sanitized and forwarded by a masked and gloved individual. If this sounds infeasible or too much of a headache, it's important to note that Amazon have implemented a similar approach at their warehouses across the world. Much of the countries in Asia are letting people back to work because of the strict health protocols they've put in place. If we follow the same suit, we should also be required to wear masks at the workplace, have temperature checks upon entry, observe social distancing, and have ample hygiene and sanitation supplies available. Further, any employee that shows any possible symptoms of the illness should be promptly tested. For places that are normally densely populated, we need to adhere to social distancing and proper hygiene practices. For example, at airports, we need a health protocol to check the temperature of each passenger before boarding the plane, and after. We should require the wearing of masks on the plane, and any person attempting to fly a jet but shows symptoms of a fever or any symptoms should take a rapid turnaround for 4 hours. At the time of recording, nations like the UK, where I am from, are aiming to test around 100,000 people a day. While this may sound impressive, it's simply not enough. We need to bump this up massively. There should be an option for anyone to get tested for the virus for free. To a degree, I believe that a person has the first and foremost right to determine what does and doesn't happen to their body, and in this case, an option of treatment and vaccine fall into this right. If someone doesn't want to get the vaccine or get a certain treatment, they should have the option to uphold that right, as long as they don't abuse that power and deliberately go around infecting others. To wrap up this video, we have covered a lot, from determining whether the current lockdown is effective, an alternative approach of herd immunity, detrimental damage that could be inflicted to the economy if everything continues to be shut for many months, and a potential strategy that's different to the one that's currently being implemented across the board. Even if this new strategy is implemented and works, we shouldn't really go back to our old ways. We need to learn from this pandemic and become people of action. We can do this by being more grateful for the small and big things in life, whether it's being able to give a high five to a friend without breaking the law, or by saving the planet by commuting less. We need to take meticulous action and not let history repeat itself no more. If you want to engage in proper discourse on this and many other topics, make sure to visit lazycitrus.com and start talking. Otherwise, thanks for watching, like and subscribe. Till next time, peace.